It's 3 o'clock. Let's begin. I know everybody's time's kind of important. Get going. Farmer, can we get a roll call, please?
Chair Michael Peen,
Present.
Vice Chair Michael Baker,
Yeah, you're
Yeah?
vice chair. That's what happens when you're not here.
Okay. Present.
Secretary Nicholas Need,
Nick, are you here?
I am here.
Christy Worcester,
Present.
Cindy Potter,
Present.
Dustin Hawkins,
Present.
Jason Pollock, Jeremy Green, I believe is absent, Penny Kudimo,
Present.
Steve Webb,
Absent.
absent, Tim Geisner,
Absent.
Tim Plummer,
Absent.
Tony Lanson,
Absent.
Tony Mitchell,
Present.
and last but not least, Trent Titus. Chair, we have a quorum. You may
Thank
proceed.
you very much, Farmer. Okay, regular agenda. The first is review and discuss draft time, place, and manner regulations for homeless camping. Nick,
Great. Well, let's start off with a bit of good news first before we dive in substantively. Last week, the city received a notice of award. Notice that we received our request for just over $1 million for our homeless service center for the construction of that. So thank you all involved. Looking at Mr. Baker, who is on the committee, and appreciate the help that you may have given us on that.
perspective.
Thank you. Yes, so that project was, we recently found that we were substantially underfunded. And so we're gonna use that $1 million generally to, one, improve Oak Street, which is on the north side of the property, so you have a city street there. And then rework the parking lot a little bit. We'll also be able to hire a construction manager for the city, so they'll work with the general contractor to make sure submittals and issues are resolved in a timely manner. We'll have money to actually do the special testing, concrete and other special tests that go on to make sure that the materials and construction are in keeping with the specs. And then last, but one would argue more importantly, furnishings for the building as well. So, yeah, so that project is on a good glide path now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's great to hear.
Yes, yeah. So what I wanted to do today, in terms of the agenda is, first, look at the, map that I sent out on the homeless, or the supplemental, packet, seems like Friday. One of the, and bring the, really the committee up to speed in terms of the staff thinking, after our last advisory committee meeting. So at our last advisory committee meeting, we talked about using a portion of the 3rd Street right of way. And so as you look at the map, staff's looking at, or was thinking that that would be that kind of orangish or yellow color. You can see the homeless service centers, that property identified on the map. Staff also went out to the Public Works property there, that's highlighted in yellow, late last week, and we looked at and discussed it at great length whether we can use some portion of the city's B Street properties there, and if so, where. And I'll just summarily say that what we generally concluded was it might be best to leave the camp where it is today, to the extent that it's on city property, If it's off of city property, meaning encroaching on private property, we need to work with those individuals to relocate them back onto city property. And I know, Tony, you'd mentioned early on in the meeting, and I'll address that comment here in a second. Some thoughts behind that were, one, they're already there. If you need to relocate them, it's going to be challenging. The way that the ordinance is drafted right now, and it's pretty common amongst the jurisdictions across the state, is that camps are defined to be 150 square feet. When you look at the camps down along the creek right there, they are not 150 square feet. They are much bigger than that. And so there's some concern that we need to work on that. We're gonna have to scale some of those back, but that's probably gonna be easier than relocating them. So the goal here was to have 2, maybe 3 locations that we could identify where homeless could camp, not on some sort of time period, meaning like 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning, but really 24 hours a day. And so that is another kind of change in the thinking here. And so that helps with that. Additionally, I looked at the map and I see that you'll see that ODOT owns the property, call it south and southwest of the homeless service center. I did talk with Bob Townsend, our area manager, late last week about ODOT's interest in allowing the city to use the pink area within that red highlighted property for homeless camping. And in essence, he reported that, one, they won't sign an agreement that says that. They also won't tell homeless people to get off the property in the short term. Long term, they would be, he is totally fine with transferring that portion of the property to the city. Takes about 6 months. And so they do need to be compensated for it. And so there's a number of different ways that we could work with them for compensation on that, that we need to explore. So Bob told me that he would, in about 2 weeks, send me an email outlining the general kind of terms and process to go through to get that portion of land released from ODOT and then under city ownership. So that would give you a significantly amount more land due west of the homeless services center there that you could use that large area right there.
Is this the truck, what I call the loop that they're talking about? That would be south of the homeless services center being up on what I call the bluff.
Yeah.
You know, the loop, you know.
No. So it would be directly west of that. So you actually need to go up the bluff a little bit, and on the flat, kind of general flat area, that is ODOT's property directly adjacent to the shelter. Yeah. They are.
It's that
Just the pink.
pinkish purple square on it, or rectangle on there.
Yeah.
That's also part of their property, but that's the part of the property Nick's talking about, the lettuce use.
Yeah. So I think what I'm sensing is that we've got the existing camp location. We know we can use the 3rd Street property within 6 months. Around 6 months, we could have ODOT give us the land, the purple area. So I think we've got reasonably 2 areas. You could call it 3, but it's really 2 areas where we can use for camping 24/7, so to speak. Tony, I know you did mention, I think appropriately, that with the recent storms, the camps along Willow Creek that exist today, it doesn't surprise me that they were impacted. And so I think that's one of the other strategies why we want to have 1, maybe 2 areas where we can have those individuals go during these inclement weather events. Structurally speaking, kind of getting back to the ordinance, one of the things that Dustin, the city attorney, and I discussed last week was that we would like to set up the ordinance so that the locations where camping will be allowed can be identified by the city council by resolution as they see appropriate. So if additional properties come into play in the future that we want to allow for camping, we would just need to present them a resolution versus having them hard baked into an ordinance, which is a little more involved to get amended and passed, if you will. So provides a little more flexibility. And the same token, if you needed to remove a property that was being used for camping that probably wasn't working anymore, you could also do that as well. So the intention here is to have the ordinance set up, identify the properties by resolution where camping can occur, and that can be somewhat flexible over time. And I think with these two locations, in my mind, I want to hear feedback from the committee. We've got some pretty decent options, and like to hear some thoughts and comments on locations and whether this is adequate or not.
First off, Anthony Lansing, is the one that came in. Anthony Lansing is the one that just did. Okay.
So where they are now, or where they were before Friday and Saturday flood, is city property?
A lot of it is, but I can tell you, having sat out there for, about an hour, it appears we have some camps that are on private property. No. The property owner to the north, I do know, Mr. Willett, and he has expressed some concern for some of the encroachments. My guess is that he'll be willing to work with us to get them off in a reasonable timeline. But if we have a plan moving forward, I don't think he's going to have too much concern for that.
Nick, just a quick question. On the history of this site, was this site like selected by the individuals that are there now, or was there kind of an effort to kind of steer them out of sight, out of mind? I don't know the history of why this was.
Well, at our last meeting, we did share a map of city property. And my perspective was that the city didn't own a lot of land within the commercial core of the city that wasn't already in Willow Creek. And we had talked about maybe looking at other areas at the staff level, other portions of Willow Creek that could be used, but quite honestly, I think you're seeing it's just not ideal, right? And so that spurred me to think, okay, we really need to focus on this Third Street area because one, it's public right of way. Two, it's not improved right of way. Three, directly adjacent to the shelter. And fourth, if you had to, you could expand that to the north and south to get more area. I'd say the other factor that played a role in this in my mind was if you need to relocate individuals from the existing camp on Willow Creek, moving them to the orange or the pink area is relatively a short distance, and they're close to the shelter. So let's just say, for example, there was a storm coming in of some sort and we knew it. We could work with our community partners, identify that those individuals, there's a storm was coming, that they could temporarily relocate on that property if they weren't already there, and also work with the shelter to notify them that some storm is coming. They may have additional services needed at the facility. So it's somewhat proximate to the existing camp.
What was the original, for lack of a better word, original lure for those homeless individuals now to be where they're at?
Prior to last year, it had to have been over a year and a half ago, maybe close to 2 years now. We had worked with the sheriff at the time to get them within a space, and where the line crosses right there on the far, what would that be, west side, up by where they're camped right now. I believe there's a power pole right there. And talking with the sheriff, we got all, because they were scattered all the way down the
Panther Creek.
Sorry, yeah. And, so we got them all consolidated and they were given permission to stay within those bounds right there. And that's the thing that, that I've been trying to mitigate this whole year. Cause there's other ones too that, they'll go down and move further. You guys saw it when the sheep were here. And trying to get them to move and then all the trash out of there and stuff. But yeah, that's, I can tell you that the people that live in this camp right here are gonna balk at the proposed site. They're 100%. I'm gonna let you know that from just my opinion and talking with everybody down there, or getting a lot of opinions. What they personally think is that the shelter being built, the purpose is it's gonna force them to try to go to the shelter. That's their biggest concern with that being built there. And then if you propose right next to the shelter that you're gonna make them move to, I'm pretty sure they will move, but not there.
When I say, what we're talking about is a situation where the existing camp, there's maybe a level of trash and debris or degradation or something like that, that we would need to temporarily relocate them so they could rehabilitate that area and eventually go back. So it's not as if it's in my mind, I would hope that we wouldn't have to tell them to go there, but only for a temporary situation. Yeah, I would imagine that they would want to probably move over here, but we do need at least one, maybe two more locations to do that.
Anthony, what about the campers who are camped elsewhere in areas that we don't want them at? You think they're gonna struggle with going into this Third Street right away or that pink area?
For it being at that end of town, yes. Cause a lot of the other camps that are scattered around are towards the other end of town. And some of them, they might not have a problem. But for the most part, the people that are scattered around are the ones that don't want to be in huge groups together, They don't, even when they are in what we would consider a group, like the people behind, or across from the fairgrounds and behind Dollar Tree, they're still spread out. It's not the same as the community that's down, by Willow Creek.
Yeah, I would anticipate we'll be met with some opposition to this. I mean, I think it's just the reality. But from a legal perspective, I think we just need to find some reasonable locations and then work with those individuals moving forward.
Talked about letting them stay down there as part of it, except that you would have to move to on private property, or maybe you weren't here.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, they're already an area.
yeah. And to underscore that, so we're at the staff level, we're supportive of the idea of allowing them to stay in that kind of white cross-hatched area, their existing camp. Right here. There's actually some check marks through there. Maybe you should have used a different color. Yeah, that's where they're at now, Cindy. Yeah. So again, just to kind of underscore this, proposal would be allow those individuals where they're at in the camp today along Willow Creek. Allow them to remain there. We need to get the individuals who are camping on private property, we need to relocate them back onto city property. And then in the short term, identify the orange area, this portion of Third Street, as available for camping. We'll need to do some site preparation and things like that. And then in, 6 months or so, work with ODOT to acquire the pink property from the city, and that would also be available, should be needed as well.
think that. And it doesn't flood there or anything. I've never checked and seen, you know, or looked to see if it floods down in that area. Where do you?
Oh, that's up on the hill.
No, okay. Oh, okay, okay. I'm thinking it's further down that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, and then, yeah, I know people have camped there, so.
We would need to do some site preparation. I know the sheriff identified, you know, some concerns at the last meeting related to fires and spreading and really impacting those homeless individuals. So in my mind, what we'll need to do is also probably work with the adjoining property owner, maybe cut down some of those junipers that are there today so that it mitigates the risk of a wildfire going up the hill. And do some general clearing and locating in a more permanent way where the boundaries are that they can camp on that property. In the short term, what we would propose is the ordinance would identify the orange area. Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right.
What are we allowing them to camp anywhere then on yellow, you know, city property, any of the other people direct to that spot or?
Well, I think in the short term, the answer is no. The city on the southwest side, that large triangle, we have a plan to put in a large stormwater swale there for city streets that would take the stormwater, as you can imagine, over the last weekend. Take some of that water and drain it into that area. So that area needs to be fenced off. Okay, yeah, generally speaking, that triangle. And then we talked about allowing some portion of the city's property on the south side of the creek, but that in and of itself kind of creates some challenges in terms of access, how you reasonably allow access by our homeless residents, and then also Public Works, protect the Public Works property and equipment and things like that, minimize theft. So in short, that's one of the reasons why we came to the conclusion that maybe allowing them to stay on the city property that exists today may be more effective.
Yeah, I want that. Not have tried for the longest time to get a couple to move from that area right there along the walk path, on the other side of where the camp is now. But yeah, for just the community as a whole, we don't need them camping in
Right.
that area.
Right. Right.
South of town, is that it? Or is
I
it-
think he's referring to the individuals that are camping on quote fairgrounds or behind the Dollar Tree. It's actually on Olive Street.
Up behind the wall. In the outskirts ones, don't know if anymore. I know I just talked to one, Jake, that they moved him from up across the street from that tree line there, but I know there's other things. For this map here, straight down. Up from the camp, basically on this map, if you go up 2 squares, I believe there's 3 or 4 tents right up in that area. And then even further, I mean, almost directly straight up where we can't see, there's more campers up there, and they possibly got moved yesterday. But yeah, they're just kind of scattered.
I learned recently there's somebody over by the fishing pond as well.
Yeah. Let's do. You'll look.
Fairgrounds Road. but right next to Opportunity Foundation.
Well, as far as I know, Opportunity Foundation owns all the land in between 97 and Olive. They own all that land along the street. Yeah, as you go one north, that's YNS Enterprises. And that's more behind the Dollar Tree or Dollar Store. Yeah. Is there any strong objections to identifying the orange area and the existing camp as two locations in the short term, with the understanding this committee would continue to evaluate and identify additional properties as we see appropriate in the future?
That's down in the, actually down in the, off the ledge there. Is that where they're back at?
I actually personally haven't walked it. Tony may be able to answer that location. Question.
Cause then what are you trying to,
The one by Willow Creek. I'm trying to picture where that one is.
orange one or the existing?
No, this one right here. that
Oh,
we're
okay.
talking about.
Here from the state.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they up on the bank. Okay, all right.
Yeah, straight down from where that bridge is, that first bridge is right there.
No,
Yeah.
It used to be down, way down in, and that was,
Yeah, there's a dirt path. If you look on the map, you can just barely see the dirt path going into it right there.
And I think that's probably the other issue moving forward. What's one of the downsides of the existing camp is that there's likely trespassing going to get to that camp. In other words, they're walking on the Willett property to get to their camp on city property. So that's something we're gonna have to resolve moving forward as well. Mhm. Okay.
Russell, I'm just curious.
Oh, that's off the map. Yeah, probably quarter mile at least. Well, it's actually probably about a half mile, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never surprises me. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, with that, Mayor, I think if it's okay, we'll assume that these two locations are okay for purposes of drafting the ordinance.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else agree?
Yeah. And so what we'll do is kind of an ongoing effort of this committee from a staff perspective, as we see issues or other opportunities for additional locations for camps, we'll bring those to you for consideration. And if needed, we can adjust. All right, Dustin, you want to provide a little bit of an overview on our effort to focus on section 3.2 of the ordinance. And as you prepare to do that, I have provided a one pager of section 3.2 and put it in more of a list format instead of a running sentence, as it may be able to allow us to look at some of these issues or the different aspects of it a little easier to read. So with that, Dustin, would you provide us some context and how we should go about doing this?
Yeah, so this is the manner portion of the time, place, and manner regulation, as the heading for this section states. And these are just really what is permissible as far as how the campers go about camping. There are several with regard to the areas in which a tent is allowed, the overall square footage for a camping area, and then basically rules for how camping should be conducted as far as garbage, debris, unsanitary materials at the campsites, what is allowed as far as methods to keep warm on the campsites, and just basically rules for the campers to abide by on the permissible camping areas. By and large, a lot of the cities we've been working with have adopted these in large part, sometimes with very minor changes. But that's what we're hoping to do today. This is a big chunk of the ordinance So getting the committee's comments and thoughts and potential revisions on this is something that we were hoping to get through today. So I guess it's best just for the committee to look at each individual item, sublettered A through L here. And if we can get consensus, hopefully we can move through this. And then I think the rest of the ordinance, we should be able to move through fairly quickly if we can get through this.
Yeah, so section A, we'll just work our way through it if that's okay with the committee. Section A requires that sidewalks be kept clear. And that's defined as no less than 4 feet. Since we're not identifying any areas with sidewalks, do we need that, Dustin?
Oh, no, the only reason to leave it in is if in the future, the council identifies areas by resolution that included sidewalks, you'd be covered there. There needs to be at least 3 feet of continuous width. Some cities have went up to 6. But so for now, if there are no properties with sidewalks in the immediate, I guess, no, it doesn't make sense. But if in the future, the council is gonna identify properties by resolution, maybe it's not a bad idea to keep it in there in case some of the future properties do have sidewalk.
That pertain to walking path as well, because they're along the walking path right now.
Good point.
So the definition, I believe sidewalk is defined, and it includes multi-use pathways. So I don't know if that would cover what you were just describing.
The definition does include multi-use pathways.
Right.
Well, section A is saying you can't, you have to keep it clear. Yeah. Okay. Any other issues or concerns with A?
All right, just to clarify, does that mean we are updating the definition to specifically include a walking pathway versus a paved between the curb line and adjacent property line that the definition is now? Or is that definition enough to have that in there?
Well, I think the definition as drafted says sidewalk means the portion of the street between the curb line and adjacent property line intended for use of pedestrians and includes multi-use pathways. In other words, pathways for bicycles and pedestrians. So I think the existing definition includes the multi-use trail that the sheriff was referring to.
A little bit more clarification, because the way I would interpret that as an administrator would be only between the curb line and adjacent property lines. So the multi-use path doesn't apply under that condition if I was reading that and trying to interpret it.
Could you just say continuous sidewalks and pathways?
Well, how about we do this?
Designated pathways throughout, or designated pathways,
Yes.
multi-use pathways.
Yeah. Dustin, can you help us wordsmith this offline?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 ways to approach it. We could, in the manner regulations A, we could, in addition to sidewalk, use a term that would cover what the committee's talking about additionally. Or we could roll in what's being described into the definition of sidewalk. I think I'd rather have it as its own defined term, but yeah, Nick, we can talk about how to do that.
I would tend to agree. A separate definition of maybe multi-use path would probably be helpful as well.
I'd agree too, and I would stay away from the word designated. Because these footpaths, who's gonna designate the footpath? Well, it's gonna be whoever's using them, and they can move. So that would really box you in as to how you could actually enforce this.
Okay. Alrighty, with that change noted, we'll move on to B. So this provision talks about how camp facilities, which is also a defined term, how they may be constructed. And I see this as being a problem only because the existing camp does have a lot of this in there. And so this would be something we would need to work with our existing campers on changing so that it complies with this requirement, or that we maybe need to amend this requirement to enable what they have.
And we do something that allows to build one as a demonstration of what it is. That is on pallets, something that is above the ground for the existing, excuse me, for the existing camp behind Willow Creek there. The other areas I would leave to no wooden structures, but they also dig down. Some of them have dug down, 2, 3, whatever feet into the ground to make their homes there.
So it's level.
Well, no, just, yeah, it's cooler. Yeah, when they dig down, it's much cooler in the summer and stuff too. Yeah, and that's, I do agree, you get them out, get everything back to level, but then the purpose that they do these things is to, for one, get out of the rain, the water, the flooding. They try to direct it as much as possible when it happens. The other day was a really good one. But yeah, to do, a pallet base with plywood and stuff, and then just wrap them. I did partner with, Brightwood up the road to get the wraps, something happens to them, they just get rewrapped again. The walls can be built individually. I would just say just for that, that one specific area. Cause they're gonna go build it. They'll start collecting material, even if we go and take everything down.
Thoughts on that from the committee? I don't know if I have a. Dustin, what are your thoughts on that? My initial reaction is you're allowing camping in one area that's in a different manner than another area. And that may fly in the face of really what this recent court cases and legislation are trying to prevent.
Yeah, I think consistency is probably the better way to go here. Not to say you couldn't do it that way. It makes for a little bit of an easier to understand ordinance if everything's more consistent throughout.
Dustin, it's Tim Plummer. I got just a quick question, maybe you can help, is that we're talking about the materials under the definition of camping facilities. What's the exposure to the governmental subdivision if we allow people to make things out of pallets and somebody steps through the pallet, twists their ankle? Well, sure, but I've been party to a lawsuit where somebody stepped off my front porch, twisted their ankle, and my homeowner's insurance ended up paying for their injury. So the question is that how does the subdivision, how does the government stand exposed? We're telling them we're giving them pretty much parameters or a lot they can build stuff out of, but the question is it safe? And then what's the exposure to the city? If somebody falls, breaks their arm, they say, well, you guys allowed that stuff to be used, so now the city gets to pay for my medical bills. So that's what I'm asking about, is what's the line? We're owning the property and we're saying they can do it. We're setting the regulations and they get hurt by following the ordinance. What's our exposure?
Well, I think, any attorney can come up with a creative theory of liability. And also one thing to keep in mind is this is a little bit of a minefield anyway. This ordinance is never going to be bulletproof from potential litigation. But I think the likelihood of, yes, it's possible that the city could be found negligent. The particular person who's obviously going to be judgment proof that has this particular structure built would obviously also be liable, but because they're judgment proof, the only option would be to really go after the city. So is there potential liability? Sure. The likelihood of of whether or not there'd be liability, or whether that would actually even happen is a completely different question. So to answer your question, is there liability exposure? Yeah. But the likelihood of, whether the city would, or whether that would even happen seems to me to be low, but then again, I can't say that for certain.
Aspect we have in that camp down there. Cause I mean, literally, as of, I think, just 2 or 3 days ago, it is strictly a native camp. The only white person that was camping down has left. Is there any way to designate that? Because I know they feel for themselves down there that it is pretty much a native camp. You know, is there any possibility of any of them coming at the city then and saying, because of their, claiming because they're native, that this is being done or something?
That they think that we're being discriminatory, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm asking, but, could we get, litigated against because of that aspect? If we, go in, take everything down of theirs, and then only allow them to put up, what, 4-person, 6-person tent, that, are we open to anything at that point then if they claim, oh, it's because, we're native?
Again, then it's discriminatory. I don't think so if you're saying that that camp is gonna be met by the same standards as any other camp.
And, as we're saying, all these things are not allowed, and in the future, someone does build a plywood house basically there, what is the enforcement mechanism, or is there one with that? I mean, with
That
any of
wouldn't really meet code enforcement.
So there is a campsite removal policy further down in the ordinance. The only thing is if those particular materials had any value, they would need to be set aside according to the policy so that they could be claimed by the owners. And that policy is further down in the ordinance.
Kind of reminds me of what happened in Bend when this guy was pretty proud of the little house he built, put a door on it, and then he made the news and how creative he was. Well, ODOT saw that and yeah, he got tore down the very next day. Should have never told the news.
So I think we can maybe put B on ice for a second and maybe focus on D, which is saying that campsites are to be 150 square feet or smaller.
But Nick, we should probably back up a little bit because C is also implicated a little bit by B because B limits the spatial footprint for a tent or tarp. So if the city's going to allow other types of structures, those would need to be here in the ordinance as well and limited to an area, just like the tents and the tarps are.
Understood. From my perspective, we can talk about materials that may be allowed, but really the spatial footprint of the camp is probably more of a governing factor than what materials are allowed.
Well, yeah, but we have to figure out B in order to deal with C. I'm fine skipping with D, but we gotta, we're skipping over C as well.
Well, it would appear that if we're allowing structures, we're actually talking about some different type of camp now. Yeah, we're not, that's what strikes me.
I was kind of asking, can we designate that in code or whatever, as a native camp? Because I don't think there'd be
I think then we are starting to put in we can't have a designated kind of area, then that you just start tripping over lines of discrimination. And one thing that you're kind of, I think you're alluding to too, when you start building up structure stuff, we're really getting into code issues here. If we're actually building wooden structures that don't meet certain criteria, become safety hazard both from health and fire.
It's Nick, it's 150 square feet, what you can build without a permit, essentially, under the building permit code. Is that how we got to the 150 square feet?
I don't know about how we came to 150 square feet. This is a draft ordinance that I think Dustin developed from other jurisdictions, which has been a common standard. For the building code, the starting place is if it's under 200 square feet, under certain heights, and of course doesn't have plumbing and electrical, then usually you don't need a building permit. So this would be, a little smaller than that, but I think this is intended to be a smaller space so that you don't have the potential for really quasi structures there that aren't really camping at a certain point.
So in the way that the ordinance is written now, are we looking to establish some permanency of camping?
Through this ordinance?
Yes.
Well, permanency in the sense that we're gonna have locations where they can camp 24 hours a day, right? Under certain conditions. And so what we're talking about here is the conditions by which we would allow camping as we define that through this.
Okay, so I'm an individual camper and I get my allotted square feet now, and I never, ever move. And that's what the ordinance
Yes,
is allowing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking, the whole pallet, idea for their, for them to camp would be 8 by 16, so the 150, I don't think that's pretty good size,
So the 150 accounted for the 50 square feet for a tent or a tarp, and then the additional square footage was really just to provide some space for you'll see the defined term camp paraphernalia that includes, cooking devices, similar equipment. So it was just really so that the people camping had space outside their tent for cooking and whatnot. That number was a number that was in a lot of some of the earlier adopting cities often had this 50-150 ratio. That's not a hard number on either. I think 50 is probably pretty reasonable for the tents or tarps, and the 150 could be changed. But like I said, it was a pretty common number, at least with some of the earlier ordinances.
Mr. Plummer just brought up something about tiny homes, and I know of some other areas that have done something similar. I think it was Sweet Home, or somebody that actually made pallet homes. The high school did it. They built these homes.
Sweet Home.
Tiny home- it was Sweet Home. I think that purple area, if we were to get that from ODOT, would be an ideal area to put those, because we could make that in the level ground, and it's, again, close to shelter, that kind of stuff. I wouldn't want to see tiny homes down by the creek down there. That'd just be ridiculous. But I think in the future, that could be a future project that we might even get our high school involved to build. Would be something.
Yeah, in thinking about this more, if we need to rehabilitate a camp, the more structures or wood and more permanent kind of materials are there, it's gonna be harder to relocate them. So on one hand, Tony, I understand that they have that today, but on the other hand, we're likely gonna need to come in and rehabilitate that area and clean it up. All that stuff that's there, we're likely gonna have to remove in some way. And if they're trespassing on the Willett property, the city will have some challenges as well, because we're gonna have to either traverse the creek or get permission to use Willett's property to access it. So it almost is a necessity to not allow the pallets and things like that, at least on that camp.
Yeah, I like your idea. I think they would go for that, you know, the ones living down there in a heartbeat, you know, that area you're talking about, from ODOT. Absolutely do.
Is that area flat? Cause this is to the west of the homeless service center.
It's not steep.
It's an area that Nick already said would be an area that we would condition.
Well, Nick, with that conversation, I would say that we go ahead and we add to it written. On the. We do an appetite for allowing to build structure in the designated area, so I would say that we go ahead and keep that and then move on to.
People okay with that?
I agree with Mr. Baker, or Dr. Baker.
All right. We'll at least park that for a little bit. C. Again, this is, identifying, what they can have there, sleeping bag, bedrolls, bedding, things like that. And that those materials aren't to encompass more than 50 square feet. Seeing a couple heads nod. Any strong objections or concerns about that?
What's gonna be the enforcement level? Because, again, you know, for the ones that we've got to relocate and stuff, and because every time now that, you know, police or whatnot go in and tell them they've got to leave, they leave behind 70% of their stuff. Well, even when you relocate them, they're gonna start rebuilding stuff. You know, they're gonna expand, they're gonna bring stuff in. It's in the nature of, you know, the mental issues, the addictions and those things.
Yeah.
So what is gonna be the enforcement level with the sheriff and the police department?
Yeah, so generally there's a 72-hour notice that needs to be given, right? That's quite frankly the easy part. But in my mind, the way I've been thinking of it is if we need to relocate someone to the orange or pink area, the city needs to organize that in such a way that there's some kind of orderly fashion of these camps so that that area can be efficiently used because it's not as large as we'd like, right? And so in doing that, we would identify areas that are 150 square feet in size that they could kind of use. Think of it like as a space at a, you know, RV park or, you know, whatever. So this is my space A, it's 150 square feet. They could go there. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't lay it out. Dustin and I talked last week that we could reasonably accommodate probably between about 50 people there. And I could lay that out if needed. But the idea would be that you would have clear, call it a pedestrian kind of way that people could walk down, kind of a center aisle, and people camping off the side of that, something of that orderly fashion, right? Tony, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that.
It feels like part of the discussion is almost bordering on creating a managed camp within the city. This is what it feels like to me. Versus just unmanaged, allowed camping.
Well, see, the one thing like you're talking about with the trash in the road, I'm trying to get them to move all their stuff off their walk path in there. I mean, literally, I could bring my vehicle down with the trailer and get the trash in the center of camp. I can't physically pull it out myself anymore, but then I do get help right from down there, but it's just overwhelming. So if we do have something like that, to an extent, yeah, there's got to be guidelines. You know, if we're gonna, you know, allot certain spaces, we're gonna have to have guidelines. They're gonna there's gonna be fights over spaces, then, the normal stuff can come up in regards to that. That's where I was going with that. To what level,
And to that, Tony, I would say I agree with, Tony here. And I mean, that's generally how we're gonna approach this, because there needs to be some generally order to it, right? And in my thinking, please tell me if I'm wrong, I could have a blind spot here. If we don't set up some sort of order in terms of the space, then it's really gonna get wild. And I think we just need to generally harness this from the beginning. And I think we'll have better success in that regard, kind of cohabitation there.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to conceptually get my mind around the discussion because it does feel like we're creating some sort of a managed camp situation.
Yes. Yep.
Definitely. But it would appear in terms of what we're talking about with the lotting spaces and that sort of thing.
We're creeping up on 4 o'clock. How much time do we need to review this?
So we've, you tell me.
One more.
So we're scheduled to go to 4:30.
Okay.
Yep. So I think, yes, we are talking about some sort of organized camp without wooden structures there that people would be able to use.
That's a question.
Yeah, yeah. Any objection to C? Strong objections, how's that? Okay. All right, let's go on to D, which is the spatial footprint of the camp. It's 150 square feet, no more. Strong,
So you're saying 50 square feet, 50 square feet is where they can have their tent site, say. And then they've got 150 square feet total to encompassing the camping area. Is that what you're saying?
no, they get the 150 total.
Right,
Of that
50
150, 50 can be used for the camp, which is,
I guess another way to say it is 50 square feet for the shelter.
and then additional 100 square feet for outside cooking facilities, things like that.
Okay, maybe we could change that term on C to not say surface area. That to me. Like, I get it now that it's been explained, but I think it could be more clear, just to say that it's 50 square feet, like you said, of shelter surface area.
Does section D include somehow the term? Doesn't it need to include the term camp paraphernalia? Or what would be allowed in that 150 square feet, which would be, the camp can't be 150 square feet.
S-
The facility can't be more than 150 square feet, but the camp paraphernalia can't be. See what I'm saying? It needs to be more of a 150 square feet, including these things.
So it's camp or camping must be limited, and camp or camping includes camp paraphernalia.
Got it.
I would offer an addendum to that, to be contained somehow for those that, that 2, 3, 4 together. Because then are we allowing them, 500, 600 square feet of, living space at that point? So, is there some way to put a little section in there that states, it's, what per campsite, per person, or, yeah.
together, but they consider each one separate, so they get a whole different.
I think that's for the committee to decide. From a staff perspective, I wouldn't support that. I think at a certain point, when you get to be that large, there's gonna be some challenges there from a safety perspective.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, we really have to look at from the point, the starting point of where they're gonna push the bounds. Because I mean, they're gonna run up to the limit of whatever we set the boundary at anyway. So we have to,
Yeah.
start with the-
Dustin, can we add some language in there somehow that the camp spatial footprint of 150 square feet can't be enlarged if individuals of
or combined.
two camp combined, thank you. Yeah. You can't combine camps for a larger spatial footprint.
So
I'm all-
what are you thinking? Like a couple taking 300 square feet? Is that the scenario you're thinking about?
Yes, and we don't want to allow that.
Okay.
And I'm also thinking of families, so if I had a family with, you have a family, 2 kids, and you've got 4 of you total, fitting into a 50 square foot area for your tent might be a little tight.
And again, they're gonna push it anyway. They're gonna utilize it as much as they can.
And depending on the ages of the kids, they may need separation. I mean, there's a lot to it. So I feel like we need to kind of rework that a bit because limiting it to 50 square feet is kind of small for the livable area. Like the tent or the shelter itself.
I don't know
Don't
if I
know
have
what the
strong
right
feelings.
number is.
Yeah. I guess my real concern is I don't want it to get too big and I can't define right now what too big is.
I know.
That's,
Well, I mean, just a 10 by 10 tent is, 100 square feet. So, and that would be the bare minimum that I think a family would want to live in, size. So, yeah, it's not very big. Yeah, a lot of us take them camp.
thoughts from the committee?
Also biasing the conversation by assuming the quote unquote traditional definition of family. So when you say, I'd rather each site be designated this size, that doesn't work, then the second site. It's not expanding based on whatever definition of family is. And so if you don't have a lot of quote unquote traditional families with partners and children that are living in this designated camp currently. In the future, maybe. But the goal isn't to give them a place to stay forever, per se. The goal is to give them into the services to get them out of home. So if it's limited and they're structured, then I think that's going to start and stay that way initially. And then we can work on the next step.
I think that we need to look at that area behind where the homeless coalition is gonna go. Figure out the exact square footage that you got there and how many 150 square foot areas you can actually fit in there to determine what the layout should actually look like. And then we should probably regulate what that layout looks like. Is it a horseshoe model where there's designated 150 foot areas and this is what you get? You can bring your tent in. You can't bring in building materials, but you bring your tent in. You set it up in this designated area that's gravelled off, where they can stake it down, and then either they could have their own tiny little cooking area, or if need be, maybe there's a designated cooking area for all of them to be able to go to and use, just like they do at a park.
For the majority of people we have homeless here, transient population of the homeless that would probably work. They would, I mean, I think they would go for that, you know, having somewhere set. The population we have, for the majority, this is the lifestyle they live. And something usually drastic has to happen to get them to kick out of this lifestyle, you know, whether it's someone come in and lift them up or they go to jail or, you know, prison, get help. But for the majority of the population here, if we go and take that area, let gravel it off and everything and just allow them to stay content, most of them don't live like that, you know.
I think the point to this is to give them a designated area that they can go to be able to clean up certain areas and make sure that it doesn't make our community look terrible. They have an alternative place. If they don't want to live there, then that's still their choice. So, you know, it's giving them that space. So, you know, it's tough. You know, not everybody wants to follow the rules, and you know, no matter where you're at, there's going to be rules. That's why we're in this committee. We're trying to establish the rules for homeless and also try to keep our community safe and make sure that it's a place that people want to, you know, come and it's just not overrun and looking like Portland. So there's got to be rules. We can't just continue to bend to what the homeless want or need, and then you know why we shouldn't allow, you know, building materials. We should regulate this the way that we feel it should be regulated.
But if we do all of this and then we send you in to enforce it, ain't no one gonna go there. If we do all this, but yet don't try to involve the community to get a broader volunteer type support to actually come in and pull up next to these people, not in front of them pointing the finger, not behind them telling them what to do, but pull up next to them, because for the majority of our homeless, it's a lifestyle of, because of mental illness, because of trauma. Then they go to the crutches. They use the addictions and whatnot, the alcohol, the drugs. And they're not going to follow the rules. We're going to set all these things up, put a big billboard out there with the rules on it for a whole empty lot. For that reason, it's a group of people that won't follow the rules, basically.
Well, and then they'll have a choice. They'll have a choice to leave.
But I think if we get the community involved with actually directly assisting and helping in a way, we get some type of structure to the stuff that's getting donated down to them. That will go a lot further in getting them to move, getting them, you know, up and out of areas. Because truthfully, I hear when you guys go in and you guys tell them you guys got to move out of this area, I'm the one there helping them move and find another area to go to. And the thing is, they go and get double what they had before. So, you know, they leave behind half their stuff, then they go out and acquire all their new stuff again, however they may. So yeah, that whatever we do here, we have to find out some way to involve the community. Because then all we're doing is setting up a whole set of guidelines and rules for you to enforce. You know, then we're pushing all this on you at the end.
Well, and the simpler the rules, the easier it is for us to be able to deal with. If there's a whole bunch of, oh, this area can have this, but this area can't, then that makes it confusing, not only for us as law enforcement, but that makes it confusing for the courts and the attorneys involved. And but this is the area, and this is an area, and this is an area, and these are the blanket rules for all these areas. You know, if you don't want to follow those, you're getting a free place to live. They're not having to pay rent. And they get to come and go as they please. We're giving them a facility where they can, you know, go and take a shower every once in a while and, you know, get out of the weather. I mean,
talk to them though. They don't, you're approaching it from our mindset of how we sit and think and look at our community, and that we would want, you know, that our community would be better because of the things we do. They don't approach it and look at it from that standpoint though. You know, the mental illness drives a lot of it. Alcoholism drives the drugs, a lot of it. So we have to come to it again, just like we need to start from the point of where they'll push the bounds, that we need to come to it from the point of where they actually think from. Because again, all we're doing is setting up rules the way we think we would follow them. That we have rules and laws now for the location correct, and they still don't follow. You know, they have wooden structures, you've seen them, they're huge.
Well, they're in a terrible location for us to be able to go in there and enforce those rules too. It's not like, look, we can just pull up there and walk down this trail. I mean, there's reasons why we don't go. There's reasons why EMS doesn't like going in there. There's reasons why fire doesn't like going in there. And so, you know, when there's a designated area for them and we have easy access to that area, you know, and it makes it easier for us to enforce those rules. So.
Part of it, the right part that you're on. Are we gonna be able to build some type of road that so we can go down if there's a problem?
No, not really for that.
Yes,
Um,
it's imperfect.
six, and that right. On C, do we have to put on there what size tent? Why put a tent up? Just give them the 150 square feet period. Or-
That, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, but I think there's just the reality of if they take up the whole 150 square feet and they're using that for tents and call it living space, they're probably not going to have the area for camping, and that's where you have encroachment, and then it just kind of goes from there.
Not gonna have a lot of extra space.
Go ahead. Okay, Kushal,
I just said 8x6 tent would be 50.
I think part of this too is the, you know, you're right. We have to be able to enforce these things. There has to kind of be a blanket thing. We can't sit here and, you know, think about every single scenario that's going to be out there because everyone's going to be different. You guys brought up kids earlier. Well, you know, from a medical standpoint, kids shouldn't be living like that. It is a huge health hazard for them, and we shouldn't be making it easy for them to live like that because they need to find those resources. They need to find the help because those kids end up getting sick and die. You know, worst case scenario, of course. But you know, so we need to be able to have the way to enforce it. And the more we kind of blanket this and be like, hey, you know, these are what we have to do, what we can do. I mean, I know that.
Well, I think there's people that are in these homeless camps that, you know, maybe that's their only option. And
Absolutely.
option, a more structured option of, you know, this is a cleaner place for us to go, and you know, we have access to EMS and access to, you know, maybe some portable toilets or whatever. I don't know what the plan is going to be, but if there's something like that there, you know, a shower every other day or whatever, then great. That is their next step to get to a mindset of I'm gonna do better with my life. I'm going to do this for my kids. I'm going to do this for me. And it's just a building block of getting out of that.
All these people, we don't have a place for them to go.
Hopefully,
I was thinking about even those tiny homes that Sweet Home put up, those places and other communities that done something like that, those even come with rules on how to get them up there. They have something somewhere down Warm Springs at the shelter where they have those old cottages. So not all of those are getting.
And I suspect some of the individuals probably aren't using that facility because they may not like the rules there. This is where they're going because there are no rules. Well. So. All right, in the interest of time, so, should we keep the 150 square foot limitation in place or as drafted? Okay. All right, E, they're not allowed to accumulate garbage and unsanitary or hazardous materials. It says in the right of way, Dustin. You probably want to leave that. And also there's a comment that says on city property. Maybe we need to add to this or designated campsites allowed under the ordinance, something to that effect.
Well, yeah, I mean, if, as far as the ODOT property technically not being city property, I guess in that regard, it makes sense, but otherwise, my thought was that, you know, this ordinance is really focused on city property and the campsites would be located on city property, but with the situation with the ODOT property, I guess adding designated camping areas would make sense.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally within the implementation of this. Yeah. But I would say we already kind of do in a way. Okay, thanks, Tony. Yeah. All right, no open flames, going on to F, no open flames, recreational fires, burning of garbage, bonfires, other fires, flames, or heating deemed unsafe by the fire district. You okay with that? Okay. Dumping of gray water, in other words, wastewater from bath sinks or the like, or black water sewage into any facilities or places not intended for gray or black water. Seem okay? Well, so there will be a bathroom that is accessible from the exterior of the building that they could use. Yeah. We may need to put a porta potty up in the short term. Yeah.
There's no shower in the outside bathroom, and we're gonna need to figure out kind of scheduling for showers, with the way it's being built, because you can't have a free-for-all. There's maintenance that we've not yet contemplated how to actually get that done. And so there would likely be certain days where the showers would be accessible during certain times. But we have to figure out how this is done in a public health, sort of way to kind of,
That's exactly.
yeah,
what I was gonna
that's
say.
exactly. Yeah, to see what the requirements are, yeah.
All right, I think we're good on the gray and black water. That doesn't seem to be a lightning rod. Unauthorized connections or taps to electrical or other utilities, violating building, fire, or other relevant code standards. We're okay with that? Okay. Obstruction or attachment of camp materials or personal property to fire hydrants, utility poles, or other utility or public infrastructure, fences, trees, vegetation, vehicles, and buildings is prohibited. Seem okay? All right, storage of personal property, including without limitation vehicle tires, bicycles, and other associated components, except as needed for an individual's personal use, gasoline, generators, lumber, household furniture, extra propane tanks, combustible materials, or other items or materials is prohibited to camping, sleeping, or keeping warm or dry. So this may be, one that we need more discussion on. So I read this and chairs are allowed under section J. Yeah, the personal use, clarification there. What I think is not prohibited, like we viewed last week, there's just a couch out in the open, not on anyone's kind of personal area, for lack of a better term, just a community couch. That's what we're trying to avoid. Those sorts of things. And then storage of just, yes. Yeah. Or was recently moved by Mother Nature to the middle of a creek. So the other point here is the accumulation of building materials and flammable tanks, things like that. You just can't accumulate those unless it's for personal use. So if I have a 5-gallon propane tank and all the propane's gone, but I just, for a matter of ease, just went and got another one and filled it, the empty one just can't stay there on the site. You need to get rid of that. Okay. All right, moving on to K. Digging, excavation, terracing of soil, alteration of property or infrastructure, and or damage to vegetation or trees is prohibited. Okay, not hearing any issues with that. Okay, except as otherwise authorized by city municipal code, all persons are prohibited from leaving personal property, including without limitation, camp facilities and camp paraphernalia unattended on any city property for more than 24 hours. Notwithstanding anything contained in this ordinance providing otherwise, the city manager may temporarily authorize camping and or storage of personal property on city property by written order that specifies the period of time and location for camping and storage under the following circumstances: emergency circumstances, in conjunction with a special event, or upon finding in the public interest and consistent with the council's goals and policies. So where I see that we have a challenge with this is for more than 24 hours. This provision, I think, Dustin, was drafted under the approach of allowing camping on public rights of way or other public property, and that a camp needed to move every so often, as in like Bend has a 24-hour standard. Some other cities have like a 48 or 72-hour standard. In this case, we're contemplating allowing those camps to remain in place. So the question would be, how would we revise this to be consistent with what we're intending to accomplish and permit under the permit as a use of the camping area?
Well, yeah, you're right. This is a holdover from the initially draft ordinance that had time limitations where campers had to pick up basically during daytime hours. So, this is one that maybe should just be removed altogether if camping's going to be allowed only on select locations, and on those select locations, the campers are allowed to be there 24 hours a day. This provision should just probably be removed.
Yes, but I'll ask the mayor, do you want to maybe give the city administrator the authority to allow personal storage of some items under X through Z? There may be some authority given on that under those circumstances that you wouldn't have to amend the ordinance. So that may be another authorization that this ordinance could create for maybe the management of the site. Okay, Dustin, I think we need to revise this to allow some circumstances by which the administrator would allow an extenuating circumstance of personal items to be stored. And I know Christie has some comments here.
No, I was just gonna add that it just needs to be reflected of city administrator versus manager when you get to that. I think there should be some special circumstances in cases that the city manager would, or administrator would have that authority. There's things that come up.
Yeah, X through Z seem to generally encompass that and provide, and at the same time also provide defined circumstances.
So are you contemplating a situation where personal property would be stored outside a camping area for a certain duration, maybe if campers were cleared for some rehab? Or what would be the scenario?
Totally unforeseen. I have no idea. This is new territory for me, but I guess what I'm trying to avoid is,
What if they go on vacation?
Or, I'll be honest,
I mean, like, it's
Rehab.
their home. It's their home.
yes,
Sure.
and
Exactly.
I'm thinking the ordinance should create some authority to flex a little bit within defined parameters. So you don't have to amend the ordinance every time there's an unforeseen circumstance for which this is
Right.
a whole new area of policy and regulations that we don't have a whole lot of experience with.
They don't, as a practical matter, leave their stuff unintended because it's gone.
We're worried that someone's gonna take it.
So yeah, I mean, there's folks that don't want to stay in the shelter for that reason.
but I
Yeah.
think we need to.
Well, then I think in that case, then you would post it. I think in that case, then you would post the property and, you have the 72 hours to vacate it and then if no one's there.
The,
And there's
the
a-
challenge that I hear with what we're talking about now is who's making a census of who is staying down and in which campsite? How does that as a practical matter of enforcement? How would any of this be practically enforced? Because you don't have like a census of any kind. This is my campsite and yeah.
Mhm.
It really would, because somebody would have to keep track of them when they're in and when they're out, and how long they're gonna be there, how long they're not gonna be there. I'm gonna go on vacation, can you watch my plan? It'll become more of a managed.
Just wait for the next governor's executive order. Don't come out with two of them.
Part 3 and part 4.
Well, I think, it's unfortunate Tony's not here, but I will say this, that's also why he's such a valuable asset to our community, because he's doing almost virtually what no one else in the community is willing to do. That in my perspective, I think that's the polite reality. And so what I would, my technical response to your question, Tony, is the campsite removal kind of answers that question a little bit, but it will take someone to go out and say, okay, you're not following the rules. It may be, from time to time law enforcement, maybe time to time public works, it may be whomever. In my mind, that's a guidance conversation of, hey, your camp has gotten too large, you need to do these certain things. Someone comes back to do that. So it's more of a guidance and working with versus enforcement. And I really do believe that the legislation and court cases are leading us towards the guidance versus strict enforcement. And so what that does is it forces us to develop these partnerships in our community. And so I think that's my response to that.
No, I'm just kind of trying to look at it out of a real lens of, okay, so we're putting down an ordinance, but how in fact is that actually the on the ground regulation?
Yeah, I think eyes wide open, right? Mhm. Okay. So Dustin, that takes us to 3.2. We're at 4:30. I think we're gonna get rid of it.
I think we
Do you have that understanding, Dustin? We're getting rid of L?
Sorry, I was muted. You're getting rid of L?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll strike L. I don't know, can we loop back to B? I think it's a good idea to leave that in there, but I couldn't tell where the committee was falling on that one.
Oh, yeah, we're keeping B.
Agree,
Do it there.
Everybody agrees for B, we're leaving it.
yes.
Okay.
So my question for the committee moving forward, I know we're at time. course, we were hoping to get a little bit more done today than we did, but largely the hard work is, I think, has been done. We've identified location and the manner. What we didn't cover today is the campsite removal policy. And so moving forward, we were thinking that we were going to have a June 12th city council work session for which we would present this draft ordinance and the general effort of this committee to establish these regulations. So a couple things could happen. One, we could call another meeting to look at the campsite removal. Work it out then. Two, we could email this around. You already have it. You could give us comments by date and time certain. And staff could provide a recommendation. At the work session, if you guys had comments feeling strongly about the campsite removal policy, we could also present those to the council as issues that need to be resolved. The end goal is that June 27th, the city council would be presented an ordinance for consideration.
Nick, real quick, there's the health and safety, the section 4, health and safety fee fines and enforcement. That's another section that needs to be addressed, but that's a relatively small section. And then the campsite removal policy, just so everyone knows, this is pulled almost completely from those ordinances cited in section 5. And really what's here is the floor, and these really aren't negotiable as far as providing less. More could be provided as far as protections to the homeless with regard to campsite removal. So I think we should be able to get those pretty quick, with the understanding that what's here is basically mandated by statute and they can't be changed to provide less protections, only greater protections.
So the question for the committee is, do you want to have another meeting, or do you want to email me comments on section 4 and 5? And we can share those comments with the council.
How do you feel about just taking this home and then their comments would be?
Additional questions or someone?
Yeah, you can just reach out to me, Mike. Yep.
Okay, Nick, how's that?
Well, sure, but not in the immediate future. Christie?
Just a question on the ordinance. So if we do the first reading on the 27th of June and we give the adequate time for the notification, does the ordinance become effective immediately, or is it 30 days thereafter?
30 days. And
So are we going to be meeting are we meeting the timeline if we do the ordinance that way to meet the deadline under the law?
no. I mean, that would mean 30 days from June 27th, that at that point in time, we could enforce the ordinance. Remember, we're not relocating individuals right now from public property.
Right.
No, it's not a free-for-all. It's just you can't enforce the regulations until you adopt them. Yes.
So this is a standing committee. After this, we're going to be meeting quite a bit just to work on this ordinance and whatnot. So after this gets approved by the city council, then we're going to be back into community about working on other issues or ideas or whatnot. So we should have a standard time to meet, a set time to meet. Is everybody, today's Monday, right? How does everybody feel about meeting on the first Monday of the month?
Sounds good for me.
What's a good time? Is 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock? Nick, what do you think?
I'm good with it. I think my concern is that Tony be available, and then Tim Gasner hasn't been available. So maybe you could reach out to Tim and see if there's a better time from him for him.
Okay, I'll do that. I'm gonna say we take June off because we have that. We'll need to bring all this to the council on the 12th. I'm trying to figure out what are other meetings we have here, such as city council meetings and work sessions and things like that. But yes, I'll reach out to Tim Gassner and see if he has any particular days that work better for him than others.
Yes, and then I would also suggest, well, I would have you consider, do you want to take July off? Because that's July 3rd. I'm okay with being here on July 3rd, but my
Yes,
suspect is,
and actually, I'm on vacation that week. So
Yeah.
I don't plan on answering my phone.
so the question is, do you want to schedule a special meeting in July or just wait till August?
Well, that's actually work session days or second Mondays. But it doesn't have to be on Mondays. We could do them on a Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. But so I'll check with Tim. And then I'll bounce it off of you and then we'll send out an email to everybody, see if those days are okay.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so we know we're taking June off and we'll reconvene hopefully sometime in July. Please review the draft there and get to Nick with any comments you might have.
Yes, if you could get us comments by, I'm looking at the calendar side of my phone.
Okay, if
But by
nothing
the,
else,
by the 5th,
by the 5th?
that would be really helpful. So we
Okay.
can include it in the packet.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, if there's nothing else, thank you everybody for your input.
Thank you for all your help.